Hello and welcome to our first episode of our live conversation series with African film professionals on CINIDB Africa. My name is Jacqueline Nsia and I am the project manager of the platform. Together with my wonderful team, we curate and update the information on a regular basis. CINIDB in its finished state will be a multilingual networking and information platform for film professionals in and of Africa. The platform will host information on everything African film related, such as a film professional directory, information about film education, film festivals and markets. We have over 500 professionals already registered, and we invite you to register as well. This conversation series is part of the CINIDB's aim to promote exchange between film professionals. We will keep you informed on the upcoming ones, so please do follow us on Facebook and Twitter. You can also find the links underneath this video. Now, without further ado, I welcome my colleague and today's moderator for this conversation, Katarina Hedren.
Thank you, Jackie. Welcome everyone to this discussion about freedom of expression, solidarity, support and safety with Tsitsi Dangarembga and Hajooj Kuka. And thank you both, Tsitsi and Hajooj, for participating. We're going to have Tsitsi on video and Hajooj for technical reasons on audio. I'm super grateful to both of you for joining us today for this conversation. I'm going to use the framework for thinking about rights and freedoms that you set, Tsitsi, in your Oliver Tambo Memorial Lecture, which is also available on YouTube. And you talk about freedom to think, speak, and act as one wants. And this right is one that impacts several different aspects of life, including the rights, you say, to security and dignity, as well as assembly and movement. And as you say also in the lecture, there are serious discrepancies between constitutional rights and practical execution, what actually happens in real life. And constitutions and laws that look good on paper matter little when governments use them in arbitrary ways to restrict freedoms, especially under extraordinary circumstances like COVID at the moment, where many of us accept that our lives have to change to some limits, to some extent, to limit the spread of the pandemic, but obviously not. We trust them. We would want them that leeway to not be abused. And among those who have experienced this abuse firsthand are these two renowned African artists and filmmakers that I have with me today. Tsitsi Dangarembga from Zimbabwe and a friend were arrested in Harare, Zimbabwe in July while participating in a countrywide demonstrations about corruption, economic decline, and for the release of journalist Hopewell Shinono. And the peaceful protest action, which was called by opposition parties and civil society organizations, was met with harsh state response, motivated by COVID restrictions. Tsitsi, who protested in her capacity as an outspoken citizen and artist, is currently out on bail and awaiting trial on charges including unnecessary movement. Hajooj Kuka, together with 10 artist colleagues, was sentenced to 2 months incarceration in Sudan in September, following altercations with the neighbors of the organization Khartoum Civic Lab, where they were rehearsing in August. The artists suffered physical assault during the clash with the neighbors who had previously been harassing the visitors to the venue, and also in prison. They were released and the charges, which included violation of public safety, were dropped 2 weeks afterwards. In both cases, allies and colleagues quickly rallied in support of their immediate release. News spread on social media and hashtags were created like Free Tsitsi and Free the Artists. And in the light of these events and your continuing activism and public engagement, again, I'm very grateful to receive now your insight and reflections concerning the situations of artists in terms of freedom of expression, and also best course of action when these freedoms and when personal safety are at risk. So this is the foundation for this conversation. So I thought so we're going to talk first with the two, and then we're going to leave some time afterward for a Q&A, where you who are watching are more than welcome to engage and ask your questions. So I'd like to ask you first, and we start with you, Tsitsi. If you can first describe your own activism, which is inseparable from your artistic practice, and the recent events in this night.
Yes, thank you, Katarina. Thank you for this event and the platform. Thank you, Jackie. Yes, my activism is more artivism because I don't see myself as an actual activist first and foremost. As an artist, I have concentrated on looking at the boundary between the individual and society, and my stories negotiate that boundary and all the complexities that arise for the individual because of how society is impinging on the individual. And that obviously means I am interested in social issues. So my intention as an artist was to write, to be published, to make my films. I founded a film festival also, and to have this festival flourish and be able to bring narrative to people for discussion and just general community engagement. And I wasn't able to do this because of the situation in Zimbabwe, where there's no industry. And if you are not connected to the governing party and the people that they influence, then there's very little that one can do. So I found myself with a lot of time on my hands, and I was unable to exercise my agency as an artist. And as the situation in Zimbabwe deteriorated, other people began to urge citizens to come out and exert their agency in different ways. So we were now being asked to leave our work and come out onto the streets. And as I had no work to do anyway, and the call seemed reasonable to me, I thought if I cannot exert agency in this way, then I must exert agency in whatever way is open for me. And so that is how I ended up demonstrating. That wasn't the first demonstration. I've been demonstrating sporadically since 2016. But that was the one where I was arrested and then spent a night in prison.
And your situation now at the moment is?
Yes, the situation at the moment is that I am out on bail. I've had several pre-trial hearings, about 5 of them. The next one will be on the 24th of November. And I'm hoping that I will get a trial date on the 24th of November. And I am reporting to the police once a week. And my passport is held by the state.
And this for having protested peacefully, very close to your home, right?
Well, yes. I went to a shopping center where I met a friend, and then we just walked down the road from the shopping center. One of the issues for me, though, is that one of the things that I was protesting for was the release of Hajooj Kuka, the journalist who had been reporting on corruption, and the release of Jacob Dangarembga, a politician, opposition politician, who had called for the demonstration against corruption in the first place. And it seems as though there is an action to make people afraid of supporting outspoken voices. So that people say, oh no, don't say anything in support of so-and-so, because if you do, you will get into trouble. So that seems to be one of the things that is happening amongst the many things that are happening here.
Thank you, Tsitsi. Hajooj, can you give us a description in your case?
Yes. Well, I'm both. I'm an activist and a filmmaker, and most of the time they don't mix really well. My activism a lot of it is actually organizing and whatnot. The weird thing is, when I got my last arrest, I was actually doing filmmaking. We were actually doing a theater workshop. And it was fun and it was exciting. And basically there was this group of youth collective silent theater group. And they were actually thinking about leaving Sudan and whatnot. And we were trying to convince them, no, you can create art. Things are changed after the revolution. So we told them, let's do this workshop. And it was supposed to be a 3-day workshop. So in the middle of the first day, everything went haywire. And we ended up getting the issue with the neighborhood. And then the police finished it with using, we're coming from an Islamic military dictatorship. And the police all come from that background. So they still have the old mentality in their heads that art is a bad thing, men and women. And the biggest problem with them was actually women participation. There was like 4 women participating in this workshop. So it was this old mentality that didn't change. And the sad thing is that the new government, which is, they're democratic government. They're not democratically, but they're like people who came through this transitional period, and a lot of them are activists that come from the civil society, but they started this partnership with the military, and sadly the partnership is going in a way where they're not fighting back. So the military is just using all the old methods. So when we got arrested by the police treated us really badly. They were not happy that we were artists. For example, there was one woman with us, and the judge himself kept asking her, "Is any of these people your brother, your sister, your husband?" And she's the manager of the space. So it was a very patriarchy-driven court procedures. And in the end, we were surprised that we were actually sent to 2 months in jail. What I really want to talk about here, though, was when we went to jail, the system is all destroyed. The system is all corrupt, and this new government is definitely weak and doesn't really uphold human rights or women's rights or anything outside the top-tier talk to internationals. On the ground, nothing really changed. But what happened when we were in jail was the solidarity. It was 11 of us. We were a group of, activists, filmmakers, artists, women. So a lot of different groups joined this solidarity, and then there was the international solidarity, and this caused the situation in jail to shift after the second day. So the first 2 days we were treated really badly. I got half my dress cut just to insult me. I got beaten, I got cursed at, and this is how everybody's treated. It wasn't a special treatment for us. Everybody who comes to jail gets treated like that. And after 2 days, the solidarity was so great that the prison guards, nobody talked to them, but they heard it. They heard it on WhatsApp, on Facebook, and they realized something is different with these people, and they started treating us differently. They started having conversations with us, and they were actually telling us after a year of revolution, it's the first time they're actually having a discussion with people from the new way of thinking. So the big thing with the solidarity made such a big difference for us inside, and then it speeded the appeal process, which normally in Sudan takes 6 months, to something that took a week, and so we were out after 2 weeks. So that the solidarity, I cannot emphasize the importance of solidarity, the importance of just tweeting, talking about it, putting out videos, and visiting us in jail, and just asking about us and making reports. It was like such a life-saving, the experience was so great. And I think if it wasn't for that, 1, we would have been treated really badly. 2, it would have really broken us. The 11 of us come from different age groups, different backgrounds. We had somebody who was 19. So it was great to actually have that. And once we're out, I feel like the one change that happened, people know about, nothing happened on the government level. Our government is super weak. But on the society level, which to me is the most important level I work on, we now have this respect of, you guys are the artists. And now it's the first time you walk in the street, and artists, we have respect.
Tsitsi, do you want to add something to that? Thank you, Hajooj. About what did you have any sense of what was going on about of the attention that your case was receiving while you were
Yes, Katarina, I did. The interesting thing with my arrest is that it occurred a few days after I had been longlisted for the Booker Prize. And so my name was in the international media already. Although it wasn't in the local media, it was in the international media. So when I was arrested, the news went out almost like immediately. And very many parts of the world were aware, and people started, as you said, with the hashtags and the campaigning, and writers from different parts of the world got together and made statements. And we were released on bail, and people said that that was probably because it would have been very difficult not to release us. I was with 12 other people, and I found that I was recognized from the beginning. You know, when we were arrested, one officer got out of the riot vehicle and said, "You have to get into that truck." And we knew that we had a constitutional right to demonstrate and petition peacefully, which we were peaceful, that we decided not to argue. So we got into the truck. And in the truck, there were about 20 policemen who were in riot gear. And we got talking. And one of them asked me, they had to take down details. So they asked me what I do. So I said, I'm a writer. You know, I just do my own projects with my writing and everything. And then they said, yes, we recognize you. And I had actually written a poem about policemen a couple of weeks before the arrest. And one of them said to me, oh, yes, I read your poem. And so we started talking. And it was a really deep and painful discussion, because I got the impression that many young people who go into those jobs without a real sense of who they are as African people, without a sense that they are worth very much in the world, that other races are probably worth more than they are, because obviously they see, you know, that other people and often other races have different kinds of lives and expectations, and they cannot see any place beyond that. And so we had a big conversation until we got to the police station. And then I spent some time in my neighborhood. Then they transferred us down to the central police station. And that was something else. You know, I realized why it is so difficult for Zimbabwean people to actually stand up and speak for themselves, quite apart from the fact that you will be arrested or beaten or possibly even shot at, because that has happened. The situation in the prison where I was absolutely horrible. No running water, not for the toilets, nothing, no food. I had to have people bringing me stuff the whole time. And for the ordinary person, that isn't possible. And so then the protests about my arrest continued. And although the idea, I think, had been to be quite strict with people who had been demonstrating on that day, it then became clear that that might not be the best idea.
Thank you. I think this is also, because I think what you both are talking about, and we might come back to that, is the huge difference again. We just started with, inspired by you, Tsitsi, the difference between government level and people on ground, the real life actually going on. And that is the state, not the government that is weak or is compromising or is compromised. And I thought, I want to bring it not to me, but to the side that I represent. And I think this is of interest and of importance for many of us, those of us who sit at home and hear about what happens to you guys. We want to be allies. We sympathize with the cause. We want to give, in whatever way we can. We want to highlight the causes you're involved in and promote you and give voice to what you represent. At the same time, we're super concerned with your safety, with your dignity, with your survival, because it's an urgent situation and we can't be sure of how to best support you. And the problem is, of course, so like hashtags, it's a double-edged sword, you know. way, right? It's very efficient to create attention, and you said also when the light is already a bit on you, like with you with the Booker Prize, Tsitsi, and Hajooj, you having just been elected into the Academy of Motion Pictures, so you were very much people that in our shared awareness, so to say, especially social media awareness. But what can we do? Please give us advice. How can we engage with you, support you, and of course, but with expressing concern for your person, but not letting that concern and real concern. So I don't want to emphasize that, but with not letting person overshadowing the cause. Can you guide us? What is the best support? And especially also if we can't get in contact with you. So help us out here. Who wants to start?
Yes, thank you very much for that question, Katarina. It's a really important question, and I actually jotted down some notes on it so that I would remember everything I wanted to say. We have people who are outside the country, and those people are sometimes in institutions also, and they're looking to support. I feel that in a situation where one is not sure whether to support or not to support, it is always better to support as vocally as possible. Because if people then sit in silence for fear of something happening to the person, then that is another way of silencing us and breaking those positive bonds of people reaching out to each other. And that is what we must not allow to happen. We must not be silenced. If one wants to really find out whether there's danger, one can try to reach out to the lawyers to find out. They can get messages backwards and forwards. On the other hand, there are things that one can do even when there isn't a crisis, because for a lot of us, the situation is ongoing and has been ongoing. So we've seen in South Africa, for example, that there have been demonstrations at institutions in support of Zimbabwe. That is something that was done during apartheid, that people all over the world would start demonstrating in front of embassies and other institutions, or in front of their own government offices. So that is something that people can do. Petitions can also be given to their own governments. It's important to get governments to engage with the situation. Governments do have a responsibility to engage with the situation. As we saw that some missionaries came to Zimbabwe. Excuse me, I'll drink some water. Yeah. We saw that some emissaries came to Zimbabwe, and the Zimbabwean people thought that they had come to engage with us, and it turned out that they were only engaging with the president, it seems. But we need to put pressure that other governments need to engage with the people also. There is something called the responsibility to protect, and that actually came out of work that was done in Sudan, where in 2005, most of the nations who are represented at the United Nations realized that where a people themselves cannot protect themselves, other nations must come in to protect, obviously in peaceful ways that support sovereignty, but that must be done. And so by petitioning, by demonstrating, and by advocating, making it known within the country, whichever country it is, that this is going on, that helps also. Then we have people and organizations who can collaborate with organizations in the country. Because if you are collaborating with people in the country, if something happens, you will know immediately. So I think platforms like this are important, but also actions where we collaborate so that we are in touch almost on a daily basis. And one can try to support those institutions in any way they can with resources, fundraising again, and advocating for their objectives. And people can also do that for individuals. If you know of an individual whose work that you like, you can reach out to that person. is there anything I can do for you? It could be anything. It could be setting up a website. It could be editing a paper. It could be translating a paper into another language. There are so many things that can be done. So I think there is a lot of scope for solidarity beyond the borders, within the realm of peaceful citizen engagement and agency.
Thank you, Tsitsi. Hajooj, the same question.
Yes, I mean, for me, definitely solidarity is super important. What really worked for me was having people who are close, who actually led the campaign. And they one had information, and two could decide knowing your safety. The thing about being in jail is you lose your agency. You're like, in Sudan, it's like you don't get a phone call, you don't get anything. So, for example, in 2019, in February, I was actually in prison for 3 weeks, and that was during the time of dictatorship. During that time, my film was showing in Fespaco, and it was kept a secret. So my family contacted my producer at the time, Steven Markovitz, and they decided that it's actually better that the police doesn't really realize that I'm a filmmaker, I do these films and stuff. It's actually better for them just to think that I just got arrested in a protest. I'm just a regular protester. And because of that decision, I stayed in Munch for 3 weeks. It could have been longer, and it could have been worse. And at that time, it wasn't an option to do the whole thing, like call, have a phone call, or do anything otherwise, or talk to a lawyer. There's no lawyer. There was no charges. There was nothing. In the time of democracy or semi-civilian rule, this mixed rule that we have now, things were different. So when I got arrested, what I did right away was send a message to Steven and my sister, who normally run campaigns. It appears it's one of their jobs to run my campaigns, Steven Markovitz and my sister. So I would just send them messages, and they kind of talked to everybody, and they put a team together, and they created a WhatsApp group that I'm not a part of. And they managed to get information and send out information. And they decided on, with my lawyers, what is safe, what's not to say, and all that. So they managed the campaign. So I feel like it's always good to have that kind of thing happening. The other thing that I want to say is I actually have very little. I don't know. In my campaign, I feel it was way less other governments or my government directly interfering and doing anything. It was more the campaign. It was the social media. It was hearing all these messages and people posting and reposting and different groups, be it film groups or human rights groups or all those different groups, putting pressure and contacting people they know and sending private messages. So it was people in government got bombarded by personal messages from different places. So that made a big difference. So that's why I feel like never underestimate the power of a tweet or a WhatsApp message, or just continuously doing it. Don't forget about the cause a week into it. It's easy to be excited about something for a week, but it's harder to be like, okay, the next week I'm going to be part of it. I'm just going to send messages. There's people who came to jail every single day. The amount of people coming to jail made such a big difference because the guards felt these people, there must be something about them. They're getting so many visits from so much different groups. So definitely solidarity on a human personal level is a big deal. Like I always heard about that. Like write a letter to somebody in jail, and now I know the power of that. Writing a letter, getting a lot of letters makes a huge difference. So now I always underestimated it as like, it's gonna that good, but I'm like now feel like the pressure of like just delivering this letter or whatever makes everybody feels like, okay, this person is somebody I shouldn't do something to. And then the final thing is returning to the idea of the cause.
Yes.
It's very important to remember that once we went into jail, like was mentioned earlier, I was lucky and we were lucky that we got this attention, but others didn't. While we were in jail, all the beating stopped. So nobody was being beaten, nobody was being cursed, everybody was treated well. The moment we left, because we stayed in touch with people in jail, everything was back to normal. People started getting beaten again, people started being cursed at again. So it's really important to try to change, have a mind shift, and we really need to change this mind shift that the police police brutality and all that is just normal. Like, we need to have that shift that in Africa, it's not okay to beat anybody. It's not okay to use force. There's this idea that the police is protecting the middle class or whatever they're protecting, that people need to be treated this way or they're just going to destroy the way of life, whatever, the middle class way of life. So we really need to work on that. And then that really needs to be part of our work, is working on the police to make police shift have a mind shift away from this authoritarian way of ruling that we have, at least in Sudan, into a police force that feels that they're civilians and they're part of that, and they need to treat people with dignity and respect.
Thank you. So it's interesting. I'm picking up a couple of things. So one thing is, for example, the very importance to engage with everyone, even institutional representatives at an individual level, to always make individuals known, to make individuals know that we see and that we are seen, both as someone who is held captive and as someone who is the captor, actually, that we see you and I acknowledge your presence here as a human person, a human being. And I think also what I think you both emphasize is also that even though one might not put, you describe the government, Hajooj, as weak, you say you also talk about the weakness of your government or the Zimbabwean government, but at the same time, one mustn't bypass and say, okay, we can't count on those, so let's do everything at civic level. The act in itself to hold governments responsible and remind about that responsibility seems to be crucial. So like, no level can be excluded here. One thing I want to talk to you about both, and I think it comes up a bit, is also because you both are storytellers, obviously, and it's all about I think that how causes and human beings are getting known is because of storytelling purposes, like how we frame stories, how narratives are conveyed. With the lead character and with other characters, and like, how do we navigate that? How do we create stories that are, because these actions often need to be quick, right? Things need to happen quickly, but at the same time, we don't want to sacrifice the complexity, because if we bypass the complexity, it's going to come back and bite us at one point, right? So talk about the storytelling aspect of it.
You know, Katarina, I think I agree with you that we need to be able to engage when things happen. But I think we need to understand that we are working in environments where things like this constantly happen. And so we should be telling those stories on a continuous basis. And then it is not so important to then just react when this one thing happens, because we have the machinery for the storytelling. Now, this becomes very difficult for many of us, and definitely in Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, we had a situation where a lot of the storytelling was donor funded. So it was about donor issues, HIV and rights and water, etc., which is fine, but it doesn't speak to the kinds of things that we are talking about today. Then on the other hand, it might be the government that's giving you the money. And then the government is also not going to be happy for you to talk about these things. I have a feature film on police brutality, which is, I don't know how old, and it's impossible to get them funded. So we need to develop storytelling modalities and routes where we can actually tell these stories. For example, I think just now, if somebody were to throw, $1.5 million on the table, we could say, we want to make 5 stories, films about police brutality in Africa, and then once you get it out, it's going to have an impact, because people who behave like that don't want it to be known. They think they can do it secretly. I mean, Hajooj just told us how everything changed when people realized who he was and people came to see him and this kind of thing. So we need those kinds of platforms so that we can get the stories out, and that will have a huge impact. So for me, it is about the ongoing storytelling as well as the momentary reaction, because social media and that kind of thing are very good for momentary reactions.
Hajooj, Thank you.
Yeah, totally agree with that, and the continuity of the narrative needs to go. But talking about the complexity of the narrative, for example, if you talk about our case, I can just like go into the details because it's not we weren't just put in jail because what happened. There was a revolution, and then there was this, and then there was like all these details and who we were and what the police thought and why did this escalate. There's so much complexity going from the complexity of a society that lived under military Islamic dictatorship for 30 years, the difference between generations. There is all this complexity and richness in what happened to us that it's hard to just quickly explain in a tweet. And you actually need a tweet for people to react. So it was easier to be like artists being attacked for women participation or for something, and then get people to be like, they need to be out. It's easy to be like, oh, we shouldn't be in jail. So that actually worked, and it was really strong. But as Stephen Markovitz was telling me when he was there, once the campaign became deeper, and the campaign started to become about the reason we were in jail is because we had these laws that didn't change from the time of the military Islamic rule. So we still have these rules that then the deep state, who are now the same people, were still in power. Then when we started talking about this complexity, he said most of the big festivals dropped out. They were like, no, we just want him out. We don't want to talk about changing rules or any of that complexity. Yeah. So yeah, the deeper, more complex story is harder to deal with. But then it's important. So how do we create it? And I think the answer was just provided. We need to have multiple stories. They need to be always coming out. And the reason that, for example, here, while we're drawing pictures, we're thinking about SARS in Nigeria, is the connection between all these human stories. That's not what we have, but we have a similar mentality in Sudan. It's like what we're fighting is a similar mentality that when people fight it in Nigeria, people fight it in Black Lives Matter, people fight it like, it's like, oh, we connect to these because, wow, it's the same thing. Like, these police are doing the same tactics. And these multiple stories and multiple human things, they need to continuously be told. And sometimes it takes a while that people become like, okay, now is the time we need to fight this.
Sorry, do you want to add something, Tsitsi?
No.
There was something that came up and that I just lost. It will come back. Let me go to. We have some people asking questions here. I'm very glad to see that we have viewers on. So we do them and then go back to other things that count. So one from Uluku Moshe, who asks, I would like to hear from both guests how they manage, if at all, to keep their mental health sound. I think this is an important question.
Yes, well, I was in prison only for one night, so that was an extreme part of the experience. On the other hand, it did enable me to link up with other demonstrators that I wouldn't have linked up with. So there was actually some solidarity going on. We hear about that all the time, that when prisoners are put together, solidarity builds up. So that is very helpful. I think for me, one of the main things is that I know I am doing the right thing as a citizen of Zimbabwe. If I were a member of the state machinery, it might be a wrong thing. So here we have a division between the state and the nation, the state and the citizens. And so I am very sure in my heart, in my mind, in my soul, in my spirit, that was something that needed to be done. And even now, I don't have a trial date yet. November, I will be told when the trial is. So I've got a couple of months of this. And I don't know what the outcome will be. But I am just very sure that I did the right thing. And if I had to do it again, I would make the same decision. So conviction, you cannot do these things until you are ready. When you are ready, then you do them. And that readiness is the force that carries you through and enables you to, at least me, to maintain. And also, of course, I have my own spiritual and mental hygiene practices, meditations and prayer. I'm trying to strengthen my spiritual life as a Christian. I am a Christian. And so these are all the things that I fall back on.
Thank you. Hajooj.
Yeah, well, for me, after we were split into two groups. So when I was released from this last imprisonment of 2 weeks, the other group was in jail, and truthfully, the other group wasn't getting the attention that we got, the first group. And so we had to do a sit-in, and we had to organize some stuff, and so I left prison, and I wasn't sleeping for that week until they came out, and then afterwards we were like, talking about, we started this campaign for the rights of art and artists. So we're trying to have a manifesto for the right of art and artists. And then there was another protest and somebody died. So we're part of it. Right now I'm talking to you, and I'm in the middle of a sit-in that we're finishing with doing murals and art, and everybody's around it. So truthfully, I'm physically, mentally, emotionally suffering right now. And it's just a fact. I'm just like moving on, continuing just because I have to. But I am getting to the point. I just want out. I want time off. I want to relax and think about, I was like in the middle of writing a film. So it is really hard for me. So I'm not in a good state, but I'm just have to just continue because I'm just put in a position where, the biggest thing about fighting us is actually destroying us. So the whole thing is like, I'm just going to stay on it, and I'm just going to stay resilient, and I'm just going to stay. But I feel like there will be the time where I'm just going to collapse. So I'm just like, just moving on. So I don't know the answer to that. I was in a war zone, and I continued. I feel like I'm always continuing. But I do feel the pressure and how hard it is, and how hard every day I'm just waking up and being like, let's just move. But I definitely know that I'm putting it in the background, just putting this thing that eventually will catch up on me. So I don't know the answer. I just know I'm just moving on.
Yeah, being very Thank you for sharing that.
Katerina, I would like to say something else, and I can really understand what Hajooj is saying, because when I was arrested, there were 2 young men who were arrested as well. And they were not treated as well as I was treated. They said that they were arrested and put into a car which took them somewhere else in the city, and they were put into another car and had hoods or something put over their heads so they couldn't see where they were going. And they were taken to some place which they thought was out of town, and they were beaten. And the question that always was asked to them was, who is paying you? And I was arrested around 11 o'clock, and I finally got to the cells maybe around 6 o'clock. And then I had to talk to some people. And when I came back, these young men were there, and they had bruises. One of them had an open wound on his face, which had been bleeding. You could see that they had been brutally assaulted, because like legs and arms were dragging. And so I can really understand that what I went through is not at all as bad as what that category of people, often people are very brutal towards the young men, which really shocks me, because I think, these are our young men. So what is the point of older men being brutal towards these young men? But it does happen. So I can really feel for what Hajooj is saying. And I'd just like to say that the other thing that was very sustaining for me was the continued success of my latest novel, This Mournable Body, with the Booker Prize, because it had been nominated in July for the long list. And then in September, it was nominated onto the short list. So that meant that the international attention is still on the book, and will be for another 3 weeks or so until the prize is actually given. And so this has given me the opportunity to continue to talk about this on many different kinds of platforms. And I feel a sense of agency. When I sit here and talk about it, I feel that I'm doing some of the work that I should be doing as a citizen. So that is something else that helped me. And I know that I am very fortunate to be in that position, that I have this platform because of this prize that is happening at the moment.
Yeah. And I think you both, thank you for that. I'm thinking of what you also saying about the Hajooj, about like just writing things out and hanging in there, and the danger of that the resilience hardens us as human beings. That at one point we have to, like you endure because you have to, and worst case the effect is that you don't feel anymore, which might be efficient in a way, kind of activism machine, from an activism machine point of view, but not as human beings. And you both keep returning to how crucial and fundamental this person to person accountability and relatability and exchange is. I think.
Katharina, I think that is such an important point that you made, because people like to talk about the resilience of Africans. You can do anything to them, you can hit them and they'll get up again and go and plow their field and dance, but what is it doing to us as human beings? I think we can see what it's doing to us as human beings, because look at the kinds of things that are happening on the continent. I mean, where can you say that there is peace and security for citizens on the continent? So I think that we have to start pushing back against this resilient African discourse and say we don't want to be resilient. We want to be dignified human beings who have a chance of having our hopes and aspirations fulfilled. That is really what we need to start pushing for.
Yeah. And that makes it even more. I really thank you, Hajooj, for that openness and for telling so. It was very moving. I'm really grateful for that, for sharing that. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a big challenge to ask not to be resilient. I mean, it's funny. Like I actually work, like most of my work is about resistance and resilience and identity. So to me, that's a challenge to be like, no, we shouldn't just expect us to be resilient, but somehow what we go through, resilience is why we survive up to now. So I like that challenge, and I'll think about it.
Let's also go to let's see another question. Mohammed Umar asks, I think you might have answered, but let's do it again. Is your activism feeding your art? What's the relationship, if any, and how do you cope, like family and relationship wise? Like how do you do that?
Yeah, well, my activism feeds my art in the sense that when I'm out there, I'm still myself and I'm still experiencing, having experiences that I wouldn't otherwise have had if I hadn't been doing those things which can be termed activism. And of course, those are life experiences for me as well. Like, as I say, I will never in my whole life forget these young men that I encountered. And even when I see them today, I can see that their bodies have healed, but something else has not healed. So we can call them resilient. They come to court and they're dressed and washed and they're talking, but something fundamental has been done and something fundamental is no longer in order. So I'm now seized with that, to try and understand what people who go through those experiences are going through, and what it means and what their future can be. So very possibly that kind of trajectory might appear in my writing. Not that it is a one-to-one information, but it is just what I experience that I become seized with. I don't actually see myself as an activist first and foremost. As I said, I see myself as an artivist. I have to engage because this is where I am. And so I want to keep treading that line between the personal and the social and the challenges. And of course, the environment includes the political also.
Hajooj, thank you, Tsitsi.
I mean, for me, definitely my work up to now has been totally uniting my activist and my art. I think they're different though, because my activist work is actually straight up organizing, being in the street, talking to people, organizing events, organizing protests. discussing, creating. So to me, it's different. When I create art, these tend to be tools that then can be used to bring people together. When people come together, they watch a film, and now that they're together, I always thought about the biggest problem, the hardest part about staying in the struggle is it gets long, it could get boring, it could get hard. So when you create art that allows people to celebrate, to enjoy, to come together, to have different tools other than the old traditional tools to just come together. I mean, the biggest part of organizing is just coming together. So I'm creating these tools to just get people to come together and think about different things in a different way, and having narratives always brings people out to be like, wow, I'm just in this different world, this different environment. So it's a good way to start discussions and put people on different grounds. So it's a different, they're connected, but they're also really different. Two different worlds. And when I put on my artist hat, I actually take off my activism in the strict sense.
Can you expand on that? What do you mean?
I mean, activism requires you to. It's like when I have to sit and write a script, I have to sit alone and I have to disconnect from everything, and I have to create a story that is true to itself, true to the characters, true to. It's not preachy. It's not this and that. It's different. When you're doing activism, it's more like propaganda. Like you're trying to get people to do a certain thing, to come out to a protest, to be part of this. So it's different work that is more propaganda that I would never do in my art. I actually don't even write my names in that kind of work, and that's most of my work. So to me, that's different. That's different than the artistic, documentary, the filmmaking aspect of it. So to me, I totally separate the two, and that's why when I actually got arrested, some people who were with me as activists didn't realize that I made films, and some of them had seen my film, but they haven't connected that that's me. But they know me really well from the street, and the other way around. So that somehow that two worlds are. I mean, I think hopefully eventually they'll merge somewhere, but right now they're really separate.
I was going to say, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I mean, I do feel your activism and your ethos at least seep through in your films. Whether you try to separate things or not, I mean, ethos is probably the word I will use. Whether you not, and campaigning is so. Tsitsi, when you are using the word that I really like, activism. It's kind of the same thing. Also, it's the drive, the ethos, like the pulse and the soul and the spirit of the work. So it's both inseparable and separable. It's an interesting take, Hajooj. I was thinking about another thing when we talk about, if I'm going back to support, and I think that also interesting. So it's I understand also when with allies making their voices heard, because I was thinking about this newly formed organization, the Coalition for Filmmakers at Risk. And I think that what they so petition wise, I think that is, I mean, that is one thing. But I'm interested in hearing your opinion in when things are gathered under one umbrella, so to say, when people sign one petition and one speaking as one. Do we lose something in this value in the multitude of voices? I imagine also. Can I hear you talk about that? Who wants to catch that one first?
Yeah, I do think that the multitude of voices is really important. And looking at it from the Zimbabwean context, you know, if an organization happens to be based in London, it will just be dismissed and there'll be a lot of propaganda about it. So I think a multitude of voices is really important. And I think a multitude of African voices and a multitude of Black voices is really important. We need to engage with each other's struggles. So I think that is really what we need to do. On the other hand, I also think that it depends on the situation in a country. because we run the danger that we then focus on protest as well, rather than focusing on the storytelling function of the filmmaker, or in my case, also as the writer. And so we need to balance our passion, our outrage that comes when there is an injustice against one of us, to that ground level, because it's a question of justice also, whether people are allowed to tell their stories. That also is a question of democracy and justice. So we also need to balance that. And I feel that there are organizations that will engage when you are in crisis, but there are not that many organizations that will engage to make sure that we are able to tell the stories that can help to hinder those crises.
Yeah. Hajooj, thank you.
So in my case, when you talk specifically about because I'm not sure what they're called, the Filmmakers in Crisis.
Yeah,
the Coalition for Filmmakers in Crisis. They actually spoke out, and I think it was really strong to have all those names in one place and asking for me to be released. It was really strong, but also it was strong that, for example, Cameron from TIFF spent the time during TIFF to do a video and talk about it, and that was like super strong. And then it helped that then he was part of the coalition, and then the other people within the coalition had their own statements. So I feel like the coalition helped these people realize that, okay, let's do this thing. And then so I think the combination of having the coalition, it was a really strong one thing that really was spread within even Sudan, and then having these different groups actually talk at the same time. So I think both, and I totally agree, having both is super important. Having the multitude of voices, but also having united voices also helps. So definitely I would say both played a big role, and both we should always also figure out how to make these coalitions more awake, and I would actually love to help with stuff like this, but I don't know if it works actually.
Okay, then we take that as an invitation and a call, really, from both of them. We're going to round up. I have about 3 minutes left. First, can I give you two a last word on the go? I'm so very grateful for your contribution already. But give me some more. Tsitsi, do you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Katarina. I really think it's important that while we have the international engagement, we also need to have coalitions on the continent and national organizations on the continent speaking out. You know, we have FEPASI, for example, and there are FEPASI offices all in the countries on the continent. Their representatives have spoken out. So I think we need to activate our systems, and again, to not only have those voices that are concerned with crisis, but also those voices that are concerned with art and expression and storytelling, speaking out, because that is another kind of multitude in itself. If we are put into boxes of those are the people who work with those crisis people, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, but it does put you in a box. And I think we need to have the whole of the filmmaking community outraged and showing that outrage. And I think that would probably help in getting more leverage.
Thank you. Hajooj.
So one of the videos that reached me even when I was in jail was a video that was created by different African filmmakers who asked for our release. And that was super amazing. I mean, people were looking at it to be like, wow, look at all these people. And then they're talking in English and they're asking for a release. So everybody was excited about it. And in jail, it actually reached us. So the power of actually having Africans asking for Africans to be released is actually even more than international. People are used to internationals talking. They're used to, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, these organizations, even if you get the French president talking about an issue, they're like, they talk about it. But then when you have other Africans talking, it's like, wow, it actually reached other Africans. It's actually as if we're further away from each other, which we really are, than actually reaching white people. It's easier to reach white people than to reach other Africans. So it was amazing for them to see other Africans doing this, and they were like, wow, check this out. So I feel like, yeah, it's important for us to find ways to internally, within the continent, engage, but we have to realize that our voices are lower. Like, who would care if Sudanese support Nigeria? I mean, they'd rather BBC say something. One other thing that I would say is, like, I love conversations like these, which normally when I'm talking to media, I'm given like whatever, like these 5 minutes with BBC or 7 minutes with this and stuff. So those are normally where I have to be really quick and really concise and whatnot, and not go into more, have my time relax and talk within the continent. So it's actually great to have the opportunity to talk within the continent like this. So I totally appreciate it. Thank you guys for this.
Thank you so much. And again, for the 1,000th time, like 1,000 thank you for both of us on behalf of CINIDB Africa and myself. I'm so very grateful to have had this discussion with you.
Thank you so much, Katharina.
Thank you. Thank you, Hajooj.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. And thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.